Live from beyond the Beltway. This is Paul Lisnick sitting in the host chair tonight for the legendary Bruce DuMont with our weekly analysis of national politics with occasional injection of rumor and innuendo, all offered up by our panel of political insiders, pundits, power brokers, public servants, and most importantly, plain-speaking Americans from coast to coast. Tonight, featuring commentary in our 6 p.m. hour by economist and professor at DePaul University, Mike Miller, and an education expert and the former superintendent of the Chicago Public School System, Paul Vallis. In our 7 o'clock hour, we'll be joined by Democratic consultant Doug Herman from Los Angeles and Republican attorney and conservative blogger Josh Pantro. We are coming tonight from our temporary home studio at WCGO 1590 in Evanston, just a little bit north of Chicago. And good evening, everybody. Once again, I am Paul Lisnick. I'm the political analyst at WGN TV, where I host WGN TV Political Report every Sunday morning at 9 a.m. And tonight it repeats at 1:30 a.m. if you missed it. And it's my pleasure to sit in for Bruce, who will return next week. Let's turn to our topics in this first hour. We're going to be talking about the pandemic and its impact on education, the desire of the administration to open the schools, and we're going to be dealing with the economy as well, because our experts come from those two very important fields. We always invite you to join the conversation, and you can call in at 800-723-8289. That's 1-800-723-8289. Call in and join the conversation. I want to first bring up the fact that President Trump has made it very clear, along with Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos today on all of her Sunday morning show appearances, that schools must open. I almost want to say, come hell or high water, they want schools to open if we can find a way. Paul Vallis, you are an expert in education. You guided New Orleans out of the jam after Hurricane Katrina. You were the former superintendent, or are the former superintendent, of the Chicago Public Schools here. So a very simple question for you, Mr. Vallis. Are we ready to open in our schools around the country?
Well, let me point out just one comment about the president. First of all, he can't force schools to open, and it's always better to use the carrot rather than the stick. You know, after the initial fiasco in New Orleans, the Bush administration got it together and basically said, what do you need to rebuild the system? We told them what we needed. They provided the funding. If Trump took that approach, I think he would have a more receptive audience. The question, though, is schools do have to open because serious damage is being done. Children in a normal summer period will lose 20% of their knowledge. Kids have been out of school for 5 or 6 months. Are they social distancing? I mean, at the end of the day, the quarantine is having the most adverse impact on individuals who don't have the resources at home, can't do remote learning, don't have anybody to supervise the kids. So at the end of the day, serious damage is being done to children, particularly those children on the margins. And I know for a fact when I took responsibility for New Orleans, literally more than a year after Katrina, because I didn't go down there until the second year because they couldn't get schools open. I had students returning to school who were, almost at the point where they were beyond recovery. They were 3-4 years behind. So schools need to get open. And if you're going to reopen the economy, the kids are going to have to get back to school because, the greatest impact is on working families and the poor. They can't afford the babysitting services. You know, who's going to take care of their children? Who's going to watch your children at home? So it's critically important that schools reopen. I want to make one other point too, and I'm not minimizing the importance of protecting the health of every child. But at the end of the day, children are being impacted the least. WirePoints put out something just the other day, and they were using federal data, and they pointed out that in Illinois, only four people under the age of 20 had died because of COVID-19. And at the federal level, under the age of 15, I saw different numbers, anywhere from 14 to 19 had died. During that same period, over 200 young people had died, children had died because of the flu and because of pneumonia. Yeah. So at the end of the day, I'm not minimizing the fact that there could be long-term implications of, contracting the virus and things like that. But the bottom line is there are things that you can take. There are things that you can do to minimize the risk. And if I get an opportunity to talk about those things, I'll be more than happy to identify what the essentials are.
And we'll come back to that. Let me go to Professor Mike Miller, an economist and professor over at DePaul, because I think as I listen to Paul Vallis, Michael, I kind of think that most people, when we talk about the kids in school, we have younger kids in mind, the K through 12, high school, it's kind of where everybody's mindset is.
Right.
You teach at the university level, so you've got university students, graduate students. Do you share Mr. Vallis's concerns at that level, or are you more comfortable with a remote learning situation and people not being in the classroom?
Remote learning is an option that works much better, I think, at college and graduate level than it does at the children level. The key, though, is to make sure that the students who get involved in distance learning choose that. Not everyone has the personality, the drive, and the discipline to learn online, and they get behind, and then they really do lose out. Now, I'm not going to. I argue that that you can get the same amount of education online as you can in the classroom. It's just slightly different. In my case, in economics, some of the students end up doing more problem-related information, but what we lose is that personal interaction that you can't get anywhere else except in the classroom. But I agree completely with Paul that if you weigh the costs and benefits of the children going back to school, it clearly comes down that we have to open. And what astounds me are the number of people making horrible accusations against the president and others that what they want to do is kill the children. I think it's Trump derangement syndrome gone mad. And I can't believe I had to use that expression. But these people, I can't imagine. I mean, the American Academy of Pediatrics said, go back to school. We have got to do this.
So, Paul Vallis, let me come to you. You did say you wanted to talk about some of the steps you take. This is the good time for it, but I want to put it in context. Because clearly you're about to tell me that we'll have people over age 2 probably wearing masks. We'll have social distancing where it's possible. But let me then have you address it with these caveats. Number one, assuming that you and Mike Miller are right, that maybe we're not as worried about these kids getting COVID-19. If they did, they would probably do very well from it. Not in all cases, but mostly. But the concern, of course, is bringing home COVID-19 to parents and grandparents, and also their teachers and staffers and other people in the school, in the cafeteria and elsewhere who are older, who when subject to it would not have necessarily the same.
Right, no doubt.
Yeah.
Right, so let me speak to that. And let me point out that when you look at the percentage of children, of people getting COVID-19, disproportionate in the minority community. I mean, next to retirement homes and things like that, nursing homes, it's impacting the minority community. I submit to you that part of that reason is also because, they can't afford to do the social distancing. I mean, my wife likes to say she likes social distancing from me, but she works at TSA, and she's at one section of the house, and I'm at the other section of the house. I have 2 sons that are first responders. One got COVID, the other didn't. My 2 administrative assistants in New Orleans, both got COVID. One died, one barely recovered. So at the end of the day, clearly there's a risk here. But let me just mention what needs to be done. The key here is doing some fundamental things, because in Europe and in Asia, they've opened up their schools and they haven't seen a spike of infections, but they're doing fundamental things that this country should have done months ago. Number one, screening. And incidentally, you have facial recognition devices that can do screening in seconds. And these recognition devices are extremely affordable. I'm going to sum up all the costs of doing this stuff in a second. First of all, they're screening. So constant screening. Parents need to screen at home. You need to screen when the kids get on the bus and when they're in school. And you need to screen anybody visiting the school, number one. Number two, masking. And look, I agree. Not all the kids are going to wear the masks all the time. But the point is they can wear them in.
There are everyday
actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
A line is a powerful thing. It connects the global economy to your living room. Cleaner air to stronger markets. Factory floors to less crowded roads. Today's progress to tomorrow's promise. Norfolk Southern. One line, Infinite possibilities.
And welcome back to Beyond the Beltway with Bruce DuMont. I am not Bruce DuMont. I am his friend, Paul Lisnick from WGN TV, sitting in for Bruce tonight, carrying on a conversation of great interest with the former superintendent of Chicago Public Schools, Paul Vallis, and professor and economist over at DePaul University, Professor Mike Miller. Paul, I had to cut you off as we were going to break, so I'm going to let you continue. We were talking about what needs to be done within the schools to let students return safely, and really we're talking about some of the younger folks in that setting.
Well, fundamentally, a plan needs to be built around 5 things. One is you have to have screening, and there are devices that allow you to screen instantly and affordably. Secondly, you've got to have a quarantine plan. So if students are infected, they're screened, they're quarantined, they're sent home. You connect them with testing, or if students in school demonstrate symptoms, you're able to quarantine them quickly. And obviously screening begins at home. So you really have to educate the parents and do some fundamental things too. The third thing you have to do is you have to socially distance. And it's like the 6-foot, 50-person rule, meaning kids try to keep a 6 feet distance from one another and no gatherings of more than 50 people in closed settings. But let me point out that you can partially address that, and I apologize for the dog barking. You can partially address that by purchasing screens that can separate the desks, screens that can be in front of people. That's what they're doing in Europe. They have these plastic screens, they're transparent screens. So that can help compensate for the inability to socially distance. And then fourth is masking. And not every child's going to have masks. But if you have them socially distancing, if you have the screens, etc., everything contributes. It's all part of it. And then the fifth thing is you have to have constant cleaning. So those are the 5 things. Your public safety plan needs to be built around those 5 things. And that's what they're doing in Europe. And that's why they're not having a spike. And if you do that, you're not only protecting the children, but you're also protecting the teachers, because the teachers will mask. The teachers can be behind screens, etc. So there are things you can do to significantly minimize the risk.
And Professor Mike Miller, you're our economist, so you understand the numbers of everything. And let me ask you, what Paul described in many instances is not inexpensive. I mean, these things cost money. So I'm sort of curious, as an economic strategy, do you support the administration's approach, which seems to be the stick, open up or we will pull funding from you? Not sure they can do that anyway, but
I don't.
Aside. Or should they be going with the carrot, which is to say, and if you need economic help, we'll get it to you?
I would think that's the only way to go. Clearly, I believe that the states and the local government control education. The less that the federal government is involved, the better. But the federal government is the one with the money, and this is a unique situation. And the government has been part of the issue in that they've shut things down, and therefore they broke it, so they have to somewhat pay for it. So I think that Mr. Trump ought to work with Congress to provide funds as necessary, just so it's not wasted. But of course, we know that there's lots of corruption within some of the school systems, and that money will be wasted. But we have to take care of the children, I guess, and you know, children are easily distracted, as having raised a couple of them, and luckily I don't teach them because that's too hard. Being a school teacher is to have the ability to do that is a blessing. But you know, children are going to be distracted by a lot of these items, and I still wonder, given how little children are affected by this virus and how little they transmit it to others based upon the science, that I'm not completely convinced we have to go to such great lengths to protect or to separate children from each other.
Well, Paul,
even like the 6 feet, where did that come from? Why isn't it 5.5? Why isn't it 17? It just, I swear they just make numbers up.
No, that was a random number, and I have heard experts in science.
Yeah, no, and that's a number. That's a number that you've seen in from the CDC or
I bet they made that up.
Let me make a point about expenses. Clearly, you know, the unions are going to argue we need more staff. We need to do more staff size reduction, and we need greater ratios. Look, I mean, the schools were literally closed for 4 months. What were they doing? Were they preparing online curriculum? Were they going through online training?
Well, that's what I was doing.
I mean, they had an online program, and 40% of kids were online 2 or fewer days a week, and tens of thousands weren't online at all. And online wasn't being online 8 hours a day. It was downloading or getting. So the bottom line is it was a disaster. The point that I want to make is the staffing issues aside. The costs. I costed out the cost of a 500-person school, the cost of the kiosks, the temperature-taking kiosks, the devices, the cost of the reusable masks, the cost of the plastic screens per school is $25,000. You know what the budget? You know how much money a school of 500 gets in per pupil funding? $6 to $7 million. Yeah. So the point is, it is not a cost issue. There are going to be the issue. The teachers are going to lobby for more. I mean, the unions are going to say, we want more time for professional development. We want more time for this, or we want more staff, or we need more nurses. And look, the Chicago Public Schools have a $7.7 billion budget for 300,000 kids. They haven't seen significant cutbacks yet. The state is providing level funding. The city's providing a city subsidy of almost $600 million. And there is going to be a second relief act that's going to give more money to schools, whatever Trump says. It's going to happen. Yeah, so at the end of the day, it's not a money issue. It's an issue of prioritizing, cooperating, suspending some of the rules during this crisis situation so that we can make accommodations, more training, more flexibility. That's what we're talking about.
Michael? But there's also a timing issue here. This is the 12th of July. Yeah. Literally 1 month from now, a lot of the suburban school districts are going to open. What is the probability that they're going to be able to do what you say, Paul, makes a lot of sense. I supported you even though I'm in the burbs, I supported you when you were here in Chicago. I just don't know if the schools can actually pull this off. And that's going to lead to this question, should the children come back? And I'm still convinced that the science tells us the answer is yes. And they can work on it the best they can.
And Paul Bellis, I'll ask you this question because you did run the school system in New Orleans and here and at Philadelphia too, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, and again, our audience here is nationwide, if not around the world. So let's be broader because I understand we all have Chicago in our head. It's our home.
Well, I was using it as an example.
Yeah, no, exactly. I get that. But my question is, we may have viewers and listeners who are tuning in right now, and they're welcome to call us. I'll give the number again, 800-723-8289. What do you have when people are in districts that say, you know, we just don't have that kind of money? We're in, you know, some part of Mississippi or some other state. We don't have funding available to us.
The staffing issues aside, you know, because I'll submit to you that it's probably more cost efficient to provide online instruction than it is or less costly, not costly.
Well, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, yes, less costly.
I was going to correct you.
There's no substitute for in-person instruction, particularly among your lower kids. From younger kids. But the point is, online instruction should not be an additional expense if you provide the curriculum, instructional models, etc. I mean, it becomes a scheduling problem. It becomes a training problem. You see, so online instruction should not cost you significantly more. And the federal government in most states, and the money that they've allocated, that they're making available under the CARES Act, 80% increase in their Title I funds. They should be using it to upgrade their capacity to provide remote instruction. But I can't say this until I can't say this enough. You know, there are fundamental things that reduce the risk. And if children are not at risk, clearly adults are. And like 30% of the teachers in this country are over 50. And for good reason, they have concerns. You know, they have concerns about health. Well, you know, the things that diminish the spread of the virus is screening, is quarantine somebody who has symptoms, is masking, is if not social distancing, a combination of social distancing and creating these barriers, which many schools in Asia and elsewhere have done, and then cleaning. I mean, that's not rocket science. Some people may say we're going overboard, but if it reduces the risk, if it puts parents at ease, and if it makes the faculty more comfortable, because you're absolutely right. I don't think, and I've been talking about this since April. In April, I posted things online about remote instruction, how to do testing, how to do screening. I think a lot of districts are not going to be prepared. And I think the inclination is going to be to delay opening. I think there's going to be a lot of resistance to reopening. And I think that's going to be tragic for the kids. Believe me, what is happening now is, you want to talk about inequities in this country? Well, the inequities are going to grow by leaps and bounds. Because your income has a direct relationship with your ability to learn remotely,
That's
to
right.
work remotely, to
Yep.
be socially interactive. I mean, it is catastrophic. It's going to have a catastrophic impact. It's going to doom a generation of children.
You know, Mike Miller, I want to ask Mike Miller a question here, because this is a university level question. I'm not going to say any university names because I don't want to be wrong, but
Okay.
I am familiar with some universities who are going to teach remotely in the fall, older
Yep.
people. So I get that. But by the way, that $50,000 tuition you pay,
Right.
that ain't going down. So I'm
No.
sort of just curious to know whether your take, and maybe I'm cynical about it, but I mean, do you think there should be a reduction? We're doing it remotely, so we're also going to give you a break on your tuition, or should it be, no, it really costs the same, and you got to pay all the teachers?
Boy, because personnel is a large part of the cost. So clearly that means that the cost is still pretty much the same. Uh, the issue here again is those who choose it versus those who don't. When people choose to have online, just like those who went to University of Phoenix and other places that specialize, Capella and so forth, they know exactly what they're getting into. They're paying a price that they have to hope that when they get into the open market that they can sell their credential at the highest possible price, and they have to hope that it was worth it. And what we're putting students into now is that part of paying, say, for a private school like DePaul is the interaction. It is that personal interaction, which we're not providing. We're trying. We're having groups online and so forth. So we do everything we can to make this happen. I understand the people wanting to ask for this cut. Just many universities will close if that is the case.
And I'm not surprised. All right, we're going to be taking a break. I want to invite people again, if you want to call in, have questions or comments you want to make about the school funding situation, about whether people should return to school, 1-800-723-8289. We, of course, also are beaming along and streaming on Facebook and YouTube. If you leave a comment on Facebook, I'm going to check it out during the break, and we'll be right back.
Here's how you can make your own face covering in a few easy steps with items you can find around the house, like an old scarf, a bandana or a hand towel, or you can make a face covering out of an old t-shirt. Fold it to the middle from the bottom, fold it to the middle from the top, fold it again to the middle from the bottom, and again from the top, and then 2 rubber bands, one on one side and one on the other side. Then you fold either side to the middle, and you have yourself cloth face covering. It's that easy.
Flintstones, meet the Flintstones, they're the modern Sonic family. From the town of Beltway, meet George Jetson, his boy Elroy.
With instant acceleration, electric cars are more fun to drive and more affordable than ever. Electric cars are here. Plug in to the present.
And welcome back to Beyond the Beltway with Bruce DuMont, everybody. We're talking about the pandemic and education with my guest. Let's take a moment as we start the second half hour and have let's talk about ourselves a little bit, since I'm not Bruce DuMont. I am Paul Lipnick, the political analyst at WGN TV, where I host WGN TV Political Report on Sunday mornings at 9 o'clock. And then again, it repeats at night, 1:30 a.m. You'll also see me on all the #1 rated news programs, WGN, #1, almost everywhere, talking about the politics of the day. And I've written a book. It's behind me. It's called The Sioux Guild. It's my first fiction book. Paul Vallis, you, of course, wouldn't know anything about that. It's about corruption in Illinois government. So, come on. And nothing there. And joining me, it's fiction though, it's fiction. And joining me as well is Paul Vallis. He is an education expert, clearly former superintendent of the Chicago Public Schools, superintendent of the schools in New Orleans and Philadelphia. He knows education better than anybody, except maybe a guy in the classroom, and that's Professor Mike Miller, who
That's
is
right.
an economist and a professor at DePaul University. Once again, we encourage people to call in at 800-723-8289. So I've been monitoring the Facebook comments, and they're all over the place, and I appreciate everybody writing in, but I picked a couple. We have everything from "it's a gamble we can't afford," meaning sending the kids back to school, too risky, to hey, it's the parents' choice. Let them decide what they want to do. And others saying it's a good plan. Mike Miller, I'll start with you. What's your sense about saying, let the parents decide?
It is the parents to decide. I think ultimately that's the case because they decide whether to send them to a private school, a public school, or to homeschool. But in terms of it's a gamble, life is a gamble. Getting onto a school bus in the morning is a gamble. Not every child makes it to school every morning because sometimes children are killed in accidents and so forth. I think people have become spooked by this particular disease. And I'm not sure I can quite understand it given that it doesn't affect children. So the idea that if there is a chance that a child will die, that we cannot open the entire school system, you're looking only at the benefits and you're ignoring totally the enormous costs in terms of the children being at home and not learning and the long-term cost in terms of their skills and their education. And so a gamble, yes, it is a gamble that we should all be taking.
Paul, before I get to you on that, we have a caller, so let's go ahead and take a call.
Okay.
We always love when viewers are part of this. We have Mark from Carmel. Mark, your notion is kids are not going to spread the virus, right? So we ought to open the schools.
Well, yeah, in my local newspaper this morning, it said children aren't germ carriers, adults are. And as you read down through the article, it says, we assume this new virus acts just like the flu and common cold, so classrooms full of kids would create one giant cootie colony. But a growing body of research suggests young children aren't responsible for most viral transmission. Now, collateral to that is the fact that you guys are talking about this magic bullet, like everybody should be able to homeschool, everybody should be able to have
I don't believe that.
quality.
No one's saying that.
I don't believe that.
But the remote education you're talking about, I've seen examples of it in my town and around with people that I know. And they've told me, and these are professionals, educated, college education professional people that say, this is impossible to do, and many of them are returning to work. Yep. Keep in mind the fact that half the kids in the country are being fed at their schools. Half the kids in the country are poor, and they don't have the situation at home like we all assume we do. And you got this perfect storm of the next till ever, who knows when, of coming up with this stupid generation. I mean, the kids are falling behind by leaps and bounds. They've lost a year already. What's left?
Oh, that's right.
Right.
Well,
and you got to understand, people learn differently. That's from childhood up through university. People learn differently. And online learning is a perfect vehicle for a certain kind of learner. And the problem is we're trying to make everybody fit into that particular slot, and it just can't work.
So let me, by the way, somebody's putting a comment on Facebook saying, look, kids have died from this. And so
yes, I know. So kids have died on school buses. Children have died from all. Yeah, look. I think, Paul, what was that number, Paul? How many children died from the flu?
Look, depending on what's the most recent data, how many people have died in this country? 130,000 or whatever the number is now. The number is either 15 or 26. Those are individuals under the age of 15. In Illinois, Wire Points put out an article a couple of days ago. Four individuals under the age of 20. 20, almost 10 to 12 times the number have died from the flu and from other respiratory diseases. So the point is, we're not saying that we're not trying to be we're not saying put children at risk.
No.
The damage that's going to be done to this next generation is we will never recover from. And you know what? You're going to see it. You're going to see it in our court systems. You're going to see it in our prisons. There are so many children who are so dependent on the schools for not only the academics, but the social, emotional, and the nutrition. And for many children, the schools are the safest and most secure environment. I mean, at the end of the day, these schools have got to get open. And what I'm saying is, there are steps that you can take to minimize the risks. Yep. Not only minimize the risk for the least at-risk population, the children, but also to minimize the risks for the adults. And that's why I'm talking about screening. That's why I'm talking about masks that you use, not all the time, but you'll use them
Right.
strategically. That's
Right.
why I'm talking about. That's what why we're talking about having a quarantine procedure, and why we're talking about these plastic screens.
Yeah. See, part of
Yeah.
the problem is that the writer in that post, in my mind, what they believe is the number one criterion for life is safety. And safety cannot be the number one criterion for your life. It's a life not well lived. We always take risks. And I think people have all of a sudden lost the ability to weigh risks. Could be, I just wonder if the person who wrote that smokes, or if the person who wrote that is overweight, or if the person who wrote that is using too much alcohol. These are things that really can affect your life. And people don't seem to measure those risks the same way.
Yeah,
I also want to say
let's go back to the phone lines. Let's go back to the phone lines
Okay,
while we can before a break. We've got Ken from southeastern Tennessee. He's a former educator, you guys, and he's not so sure you can replace classroom learning. Hey, Ken.
Hello.
Ken, you with us? Okay, we don't have Ken. So, Paul Vallis, let me ask you a question I want to pick up on, which is put your superintendent hat back on, right? You've been superintendent in enough cities. What would you do in this scenario if you had teachers union folks, which you would get, if you had parents, if you had staff members who came to you and said, Superintendent Vallis, I'm scared, I'm worried, I am not ready to go back.
Well, I would have
this morning, Secretary DeVos basically said, get it together, you need to go back.
Well, I would have been doing this in March, okay? The bottom line is clearly the data, the science, this is the science, tells you that when you take certain precautions, you significantly reduce the risk. And that's why I'm harping on the screening, which you can have these screening kiosks, very affordable, the masking, the barriers that can separate deaths like they're doing in South Korea, like they're doing in Europe. The quarantine procedures when somebody has a heightened temperature, and the basic social distancing. Sometimes you can social distance, sometimes you can't, but you can install these barriers, very affordable. I mean, literally, purchasing the equipment and the materials to do that of a school for $500 would cost that school $25,000. I mean, this is not rocket science, and you would be reducing the risk for a population that has significantly reduced risks. But you would you would do this to reassure the parents that child safety is number one. And I submit to you, for a large number of children, particularly in large urban districts with a disproportionate number of poor children, the safest environment for them to be in, the healthiest environment for them to be in, is the schools. From a nutritional standpoint, from a health safety standpoint, it's the schools. From a social emotional standpoint. And how in the world are you going to reopen this economy for working men and women and for the working poor if you just arrogantly don't open schools again?
So, Paul, actually, Mike, I'll ask you this. You can both respond. So if you have a teacher, an employee who says, I hear you, I'm not comfortable, I have morbidities, I can't do this, and you say to them, I guess you got to leave. Of course, then the question is, are they fired or have they quit?
No, you can you could have them do there will be some students who have to be online, for example. We have special needs students who would maybe have to be online. That person could take over those particular tasks. So you don't fire, you don't destroy somebody's life because of something like this.
Exactly.
Ability to earn a living, especially if you have a large enough team that you can break into specialties and have people do certain things. I do agree with the caller in a sense, or the writer, that the classroom is the ultimate place to learn for a child, not necessarily for an adult, but for a child. And so that's why we have to begin with that. But we do know that we'll have to come up with ways of working around. I guess I have a morbidity, right? I'm going to be 67 years old, so I'm considered at risk, and I will make my judgment. Could be that I will die after going to the university or something because I take a train to work. That's a risk I take every day, and we all have to measure those risks.
Look, my work in Haiti, Paulie, yeah. I call my son Paulie. Paul has put me in a hospital.
I'm Paulie. It's okay.
Yeah, so while I consider myself fairly healthy, there are risks there too. But I want to say one thing about the teachers. I'm not talking about a lot of these precautions at the schools. While they're obviously designed to keep the kids safe, because one sick kid is one kid, sick kid too many. They're primarily, really, to a lot greater extent, designed to keep the faculty safe.
I
And
agree.
you know what they're doing in Denver? They are taking staff, they're taking teachers who have pre-existing conditions and things like that, and they're working on the remote instruction
There you
side,
go.
on the online
Exactly.
side. So
Perfectly
reports that you
reasonable.
sit down and you come up with a strategic plan,
That's
and you
right.
work together, and you don't quibble, and you don't talk about reopening collective bargaining agreements. We've asked the private sector to make significant sacrifices.
That's right.
You can't
All right.
open. You can't reopen your business.
Gentlemen,
and what you do.
it's hard break time. We're going to come back, and when we come back, I want to ask you, Mr. Miller, if things are so bad economically, why is the stock market doing so great? We'll be right back on Beyond the Beltway.
Dallas, St. Louis, Nashville, Tuscaloosa. All major cities to feel the destruction caused by a direct hit from a tornado. Is Chicago next? It's not a question of if, but when, and the clock is ticking. Learn what to do now at ready.illinois.gov to become tornado ready.
And we are back on Beyond the Beltway with Bruce DuMont. I am Paul Lisnick, sitting in for Bruce. Our last segment of this hour with these two special guests, Professor Mike Miller from DePaul University and education expert Paul Vallis, former superintendent of the Chicago Public School System. But I want to turn, Mike, to the economy now, because again, with we shut it down. We all know the lines, right? People have raised the question: how is it with everything all shut down and the jobless at 40 million or so, 38 million, whatever it's at? But the stock market is acting like there's nothing going on. How is that possible?
Oh, it was down, dramatically, only 40 or some percent, and a lot of it has been regained, and the tech sector is doing fine. Remember that the economy and the stock market are two separate items. But think of it this way as well. If you wanted to put your money somewhere to earn some money, say for your retirement, would you put it into a bank account where you would earn no return? Would you put it into U.S. Treasuries where you would earn no return? So what we're seeing is that people recognize that the only way that they're going to make money over time is to take some risks. And they're putting their money, therefore, into a stock market. Now, this is certainly a perfectly reasonable thing to do. Also, remember that a mere 4 months ago, the American economy was at full employment with inflation under control, GDP growing exactly at its potential. We're also beginning to make a pretty decent, not complete recovery. And so I think people don't want to they don't want to miss out on the possibility that the economy is going to come roaring back completely, and then they're going to have to somehow buy into the market after it's already risen dramatically. But it's not a bad investment as long as you're there and you understand the risk that you're taking versus the return that you can gain.
Paul Vallis, I do want you to chime in on this. Somebody just put, not that you're Social Security age yet, but somebody chimed in.
Oh, I am. Yes, I am. I'm 67 too. I'm much under the same boat.
I was trying to be nice. One of our Facebook viewers made a comment that said, "I'm living on Social Security and I'm not investing it in the stock market."
No.
Paul, with all that you've done, what kind of risk do you see? Would you be taking risks these days?
I've never invested in the stock market. I was smart enough when I got married to turn over all of my investment, all of the family investment responsibilities to my wife, who's very conservative on those type of things. So fortunately, despite the fact that I probably lost about 15 years of pensions by working in places that didn't pay pensions, or at least didn't pay me, working in Haiti and Chile, or the times I spent in New Orleans and things like that. The small pension I have is enough, and my wife's very prudent investments are enough, so that we're doing fine. And then my boys did me a big favor. They decided, well, I want to say they did me a big favor, but they decided to, become soldiers. So the GI Bill took care of their education. So they really helped us out, or I could be paying off student loans right now, or they could be paying off student loans. So
Paul, there's one thing that's very interesting. A bunch of research was done to try to figure out why are some people wealthy and some people not, even if they have roughly the same income. And there was one distinction of those who became wealthy over time, and that was taking risks. And going into something like a stock market over time has its risks, but its return is greater over time. And people who play it very safe all the time, they may be safe, but again, they're not going to be wealthy. And certainly a person who's living off Social Security, you can't lose your money. And I understand that. But, I'm 67. My wife and I have a bunch of money in a retirement fund. We don't have a pension. And we're at about 60% stocks, which the only way to make a return sufficient to live off of, say a drawdown of 4 or 5% of your principal, is to take some risks. Yeah. And stocks are a part of that. So are bonds and gold and all kinds of other assets are ones. So
Mike, is the reason the stock market, one of the reasons the stock market may be so high today is because the market, and you already said there's the market, there's the economy, two different things. Right. Does the stock market, is it always future looking? It is always, in other words, so it'll look to know, I don't know when it starts looking to November, maybe in October or something, but we'll start to see it react to what it thinks is going to happen in the country.
That's exactly right. It's always forward looking because you can't do anything about the past. In economics, we refer to that as a sunk cost. I mean, that's history. So what it's looking at, what does it think is going to be true about the profitability of firms? What is the Federal Reserve going to do? What's the federal government going to do? I think the market is building in the belief that the Fed will keep rates low, and that will be good for the economy. They're building in that the government is going to come by with a second and some kind of stimulus package. Stimulus may not be the right word. It might be more of a redistribution of the money, but the market sees that as a positive. And when you add these several positive things, people say, this is where I want to be. Plus, my other alternative is safety. And for safety, I will receive zero return with, say, 1% inflation, which means I'm going to go backwards.
Paul, I just wanted to say one thing. I've always preferred to take political risks than financial risks.
You kind of surprised me, Paul, when you told me that.
Yeah, but what I want to say about the market, too, there's a lot of people, and I know I've talked to my sons and other young people, and they said, now's the time to invest in the market because there's this optimism that this is going to rebound and the economy is going to begin to take off. So that's incentivizing, as you pointed out. Where else are you going to gamble with the possibility of a significant return, if not the market right now?
Yeah, but your sons have decades to make up if they happen to lose some money now. You and I don't, and that's why I have to. That's right. Because 4 years ago, I was 90% in stocks, and I had to change because I was getting towards retirement age. So,
as we have about a minute left, a little more than that. So, and Paul Vallis, I'm going to come to you because this whole conversation started at the beginning of the hour with you essentially saying we got to get back to school because of the economy. You pointed to the economy in terms of how important that was. So these two factors that Mike talked about, safety, the economy, is it your sense they do work hand in hand, right?
Oh, of course it does. Look, I mean, 85% of the children who go to the Chicago Public Schools are eligible for the free and reduced lunch program, meaning their families are living below the poverty rate. And that doesn't mean that these are families of people who aren't working. These are people who are working in the restaurants. These are people who are working for minimum wage. A large number, and a lot of these families are single-parent households. Who's going to take care of those children? And look, you can't separate the economy from the damage being done to kids, because when these families, so many of them who are operating on the margins, go into a crisis, that impacts the children at home. See, at the end of the day, it's a catastrophic consequence. And so we've got to get schools reopened safely and appropriately, and we've got to get this economy reopened so working men and women, particularly who are surviving on the margins, can also go back to work.
And
Hear,
with
hear.
that, I have to wrap this and thank Paul Dallas, Mike Miller. My thanks to both of you. We'll be back
You
in
got
the
it,
next
Paul.
hour.
Welcome to the world, 2116. You can fly across town in minutes or across the globe in under an hour. Whole communities are living on Mars, and solar satellites provide Earth with unlimited clean power. In less than a century, Boeing took the world from seaplanes to space planes, across the universe and beyond. And if you thought that was amazing, you just wait.
Today, fresh fruits and vegetables will go from a field in California to a grocer in Miami. A bottle of beer from Eagle Pass will journey to a restaurant in Manhattan. A 2x4 in Oregon will find its way to a townhome in Denver. A hybrid will say goodbye to Detroit and hello to a showroom in Austin. While a steel beam will leave a mill in Illinois for a high-rise in Phoenix. And a flat screen in China will head to an electronics store in Memphis. Because today, as every day, wherever you find business, you'll find us.